Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Leibowitz, and I'm a regular on social media. I have a lot of discussions, debates. Sometimes I find people to be not really good faith. They're not intellectually honest, but some people are. Even when I disagree with them, I can tell that they're honest. They're bringing a good perspective and a good frame of mind to the discussion. And recently somebody asked me a couple of questions about the objectivist ethics, and it just didn't seem like X was the right format to have a long form discussion on it. So I asked him to come on the show. He kindly obliged. So here he is. David Pharr, welcome.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, man. Obviously we've gone back and forth some on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And, I appreciate you having me on. And I think it's really good when people are actually able to just like sit down and actually have a conversation and try to figure out and just kind of learn, because, I mean, you're an objectivist, so you think that there's an objective right and an objective wrong.
Sure.
For sure. But I think it's really, really good when people are able to discuss their ideas and kind of be respectful about it, and we kind of all learn as far as that goes. But
sure.
The first thing I wanted to kind of bring up is I think I'd seen a post that you had quote tweeted where you had said, I think the post read, can you be moral without like a religion? And I believe you said yes, and I agree with you. Like in practice, pragmatically, I think that's completely possible. I know plenty of people that are atheists, agnostics, whatever it may be, that are plenty moral, wonderful people, have done wonderful, great things. My questions were more just looking at kind of working the theoretical behind that, and kind of how you get to that from an objectivist lens, if that makes sense.
First, I just want to say you're 25 years old, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I think that's great. 25 years old and just right in the mix of intellectual discussions. I think it's fantastic. Are you a student? Where are you coming from as far as your interest? Are you autodidact? Where's your interest in these topics come from?
I really am. I'm really not super sure. Kind of where I never really was interested in like politics or philosophy, anything like that in like high school. But I don't know, in college, obviously you kind of get hit with things from left, right, center, and you start reading. And I've always been a pretty big reader. I've just always liked to read and been pretty intellectually curious. But I'm not really sure where it comes from, but I talk to people all the time, and I have a lot of friends, especially around my age, that don't really care about a lot of the stuff, or like care about like where their ideas come from. And I'm just very obsessed about like trying to understand the world and trying to understand like the ideas around, whether that be liberty or just how people interact with each other and things like that. But as far as schooling and stuff, I went to school at the University of South Carolina, studied mechanical engineering, and graduated from there, and then moved to Florida. I now do chemical injection design work for companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, where we like work with their processed water for their rocket engines and things like that.
Okay, so now to get to your question, you're right. Somebody posted, is religion necessary to have an objective morality or a true morality, something along those lines? And I'm
trying to pull the tweet up right now just so I can be a bit more.
Okay, but I said nope. I remember my answer was nope, not necessary.
Yes.
Now, you talked about in practice, yes, you can be a good person and not be religious, but you were having an issue with the theoretical end of it, right?
Correct.
So how could you have, like, if you say somebody's a good person, right?
Mm-hmm.
how are you deciding that person's a good person if you don't have the theoretical case to make? Now, I should just, so it's not coming off like I'm trying to throw a trick question.
No, I get what you're
In
saying.
objectivism, we reject the theory practice dichotomy, right? If
Okay.
something works in theory, it works in practice. If it doesn't work in practice, it doesn't work in theory. So when you say that, my antenna go up right away, and I'm looking for where that sort of break happens in your
Okay.
thinking. So that's why I'm asking. So if you are to say somebody's a good person, what is the criteria that you're going by, and where does it come from?
Interesting. I mean, I think that's an interesting question, because I do consider myself a Christian. Okay. So I think that's, I would say that I draw some sense of that from that. Some sense of that I think is somewhat inherent when you're born. Um, I, I don't know that that there's a complete, like, concrete black and white answer to that, though, if that makes sense.
Okay, so your basic framework then is if somebody behaves in line with a Christian ethic, that's
Um,
where you're coming from to say that they'd be a good person. Not that they have to be a Christian, just that they do unto others, for instance, as they would have done unto themselves.
yes.
They're loving, they practice compassion, humility, that sort of thing. Right. Okay.
Mhm.
So you and I first came into contact because I was critical of comic Dave Smith, right?
Yep. Yep.
This is the fundamental question that I have for him, and that I always want to discuss with him. Now, I'm not one of these people. I'm not saying he's afraid to discuss it with me or anything like
Mhm.
that. He's got a
Mhm.
huge audience. He can't argue with everybody that wants to debate with him. I get that. But
Absolutely.
nonetheless, I do want to debate with him. And yes, it is partly because I want to attract a bigger audience. I don't see anything wrong with that. But this
I
is
don't
the
see anything
question.
wrong with that either. Just for
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but this is the question that I have for him, is by what criteria? So now I find that a lot of people make moral judgments, but don't even know the criteria that they're using. So now you just said, in essence, that your ethical system is Christianity. Okay, now that gives us for debate. Not that we're going to get into debate about it, but I can now say, okay, then you would have to then concede, if I could demonstrate to you that Christianity was wrong, then you would have to reject Christianity as the base of your ethics, and we would
Of
have to
course.
find
Yes.
something else.
Yes.
That's why this question is vital to answer, because if you don't know the root of your moral judgments, then there's no way we can ever really debate your moral conclusions. For instance, if you say that Israel's wrong, they're using excessive force in Gaza, right? But that implies a lot of things that we have to discuss: the nature of violence, the nature of self-defense. Does self-defense cover retaliatory force? Does that retaliatory force have to be in line with commensurate with the exact threat you're facing? And all of those need reference to some standard, right? You have to look at something. Otherwise, you're just throwing out emotional sort of
Yeah. Correct.
your emotional reactions. Okay, so you don't then have a problem, with bridging the theoretical and the practical, because your theory is the Christian ethic, and you judge practical actions based on that theory.
Okay.
Does
Yeah.
that
No.
make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. I think a little bit more of kind of. I'm pulling up the tweet here. Hold on a second.
That's okay. This is your first time too on a podcast. Am I correct, or have you been on before?
Yeah, I've done a couple. I
You
don't
have
do
you?
them. I don't do them often. Yeah, I only do them if, like, someone. I'm not, yelling and screaming to get on podcasts. I'm not an extremely social person, but let's see here. Okay, so the main thing that I was kind of saying, trying to work backwards from kind of where your position is, if I'm trying to understand where you can even create any type of moral standard without having like an undergirding of that moral standard. Like
Mhm.
for example, like why do you personally know that killing someone is wrong? Or I mean, I guess that's a little bit of a loaded question because killing is, so let's say murdering someone is wrong. Let's not say killing.
Sure. So here's the thing with that, and I'm going to answer it, but that's a far down the line ethical conclusion, right?
Correct.
Those are difficult to answer sometimes, even when you have the standard. So sometimes somebody will ask me a moral question and I don't know the answer, and then they think they've got me in some way, but I don't know. I'm not omniscient. I don't know the answer to everything, right?
Sure.
And I'm not going to pretend like I do. It doesn't mean I'm God. It means I'm honest, because I don't think anybody knows everything. But I just want to give a little clarification and tell me if I'm misrepresenting your position. I'm recalling now the tweet is, you asked me how you can justify morality based on reason.
Yes.
That was your initial
Yes.
question. And you then said, who's going, if two people disagree, you asked me, who decides who's right? And my response was, well, reality is the ultimate decider of who's right and wrong. And what that necessarily means is sometimes people just leave disagreeing, and you may not know in the moment who's right or wrong. You may never find out, but it doesn't mean that somebody's
not right
or
or
wrong.
No, okay.
For instance, Einstein famously did not buy into the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. Right. And I'm not trying to be pedantic. I don't really understand quantum mechanics, even though I've read about it a little bit. I don't know. I just know Einstein disagreed. Right. So Einstein debates with Niels Bohr. I don't know that they ever resolved it, but one of them's right, one of them's wrong. And what determines it is reality. Right. The reality is what it is, regardless of what they say. So in regard to that, it doesn't matter that people disagree over ethics or disagree over anything else. Reality is the final arbiter. So now you ask me how I can know there's a morality, or how can there be a morality, or who creates the standard? But that, even the question who creates the standard implies it needs somebody to create it, right? It's the challenge or the answer is assumed in the question, but I would reject the idea that someone needs to create it. And I would just say, I'm going to take you. I came to now. I read Ayn Rand, right?
Hold on, I'm losing you a bit. Hold on a second.
Okay.
Okay, I think you're good now. You were just kind of freezing a bit.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of take you through right now. I'm not trying to say that this is. I got my ideas on ethics from Ayn Rand.
Yes.
But I did have to learn them for myself. I couldn't just take her word for. While we could go through definitions, for instance, ethics or morality is a code of values to guide individuals' choices and actions, right? That's a pretty standard definition. There's some different, but they all basically say the same thing. But the retort that I gave when arguing with myself was, yeah, well, that's just, I choose to call it that. Morality, that doesn't make it so. But here's what I do know. I was not born knowing how to behave, right? And I had to learn these things. I personally was taught very, very wrong. And what I mean by wrong, I was taught in a way that was counterproductive to my well-being and the well-being of others. I wasn't taught what would be considered ethical by virtually anyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was taught to shoot people, just, so you get an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everybody has to learn how to survive, right? Now, I do know this, that some actions that I take are harmful to myself and some are beneficial. I learned that from experience. So when I look at that and I say, okay, I'm born not knowing how to behave, and I have to choose on a daily basis what I'm going to do. And then I say, okay, well, what do you call this dynamic of figuring out what to do, figuring out how to behave? And I say, well, that's ethics. That's how you conceptualize. You put the name on what it is that I'm doing in trying to figure, not just me, but anybody that's trying to figure out the process is ethics. So what Ayn Rand does is goes further and says, okay, well, what gives rise to this problem? What gives rise to the situation where a person has to determine or figure out how to behave? Do I eat the blackberry? Do I eat the red berry? One's poison, one's healthy. Do I pick a career in toxicology or taxonomy? What's best? What gives rise to this whole thing is first living organisms. All living organisms face an alternative that inanimate matter does not face. And that is the constant possibility of going out of existence. The life portion, not the matter, not the energy, the life portion, the life portion. All living entities have to take action in order to maintain that life portion, whereas inanimate matter does not. So and then when you get to the human level, you have an entity that is not born knowing what to do, does not have instincts telling it what to do, is not taught automatically what to do by a parent, but you're talking about something that has to figure out what to do. And it has to act freely in order to do it. And so that's what she called ethics. And she said, because of that, because you have an entity that has to choose how to act in the face of alternatives that could lead to its death or could lead to its success, that's ethics. And his life is the standard of value, the standard by which to judge whether something's good or bad. Because with any living organism, the whole concept of good and bad comes into play. Something's good or bad for it. And when it comes to humans, we have to choose.
Yeah.
Now, I understand, like, even as I'm talking, I'm sensing that I may have missed something. So if I did, by all means, ask me.
And I've read some Rand, so like I understand like some of her arguments. I haven't read, and obviously I'm not quite as in depth into it as you are, but I understand some of her main arguments, and I think I mean she gets kind of written into like a bad light because of I don't know. She's very easy to take out of context because the normal, what I would say, what I would call like blue-pilled response to an objectivist or really even a libertarian is that selfish and selfishness is bad. And I mean, I don't necessarily believe that. She didn't necessarily believe that. So I think like, and maybe not even say selfishness, more so, I guess, doing things, worrying about yourself, if that makes sense as far as what you were saying.
Well, a lot of people automatically say it's wrong to act in your own interest, yes. Right? Now, the important distinction here is that she taught that it's right to act in my own interest, but not if it's at the expense of others. In fact, she argued it's not possible that it would be in my interest to act at the expense of others. Now, that is a far down the line conclusion, right? That's when, I mean, you really got to get into, well, why isn't in my interest? But the first was once you have life, once you have a living entity, you have the concept of value, right? You have an object or quality that's desirable as a means or end in itself for an entity that has to act to maintain itself. Once you have life, you have that. And once you have human life, you have an entity that has to choose it. And that's why we have ethics. So that's the starting point. Right? That's why we need ethics, because we're not born knowing what to do and we have free will. We have to choose what to do.
Yeah.
So so once you know that, right? First of all, do you have any objections to anything that I've just said?
Objections as in short, no, as far as that goes, no. as far as
Okay.
what as far as like I do understand exactly what you're saying, even though I might have, I guess, some disagreements on some things that are a little bit further down. You're kind of still in the
Well,
yeah.
because this is the vital part. Because if we establish this, right, then you would have to say, okay, it is possible to arrive at by the use of reason at an objective ethics.
Oh
Then
no,
you would
at this point, I've kind of already kind of granted that point in the
okay,
fact that more so understanding the fact that even though two people may disagree on something, and whether that is decided now, 75 years from now, or 10,000 years from now, that in that moment one of them
okay,
was correct. Now, I think that, like, is it possible with some situations though that neither position is like, okay,
yes,
so if we're talking about something like abortion right now,
yeah,
so someone says that abortion is good up until 8 weeks. Someone says abortion, it should be or illegal completely. It should be completely banned. Or someone says abortion should be legal up until the point of birth or whatever. How is there ever, does it even matter that at some point we will know if in that, or I guess within the time frame in which those people are arguing together, this pragmatically doesn't even matter. Like, does it matter that
yeah. I don't
that
know.
they're it?
I don't know. Do you know I was pro-life for most of my adult life. I was
Yeah.
against abortion.
Mhm.
I changed my mind and became pro-choice maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I don't know,
Mhm.
because I ultimately was uncertain about it. And I said, well, given that I'm uncertain about it, I don't want to give the state that kind of power, because I'm always skeptical of giving the government power.
Absolutely.
I'm far less convinced than a lot of people are when it comes to this subject. One of the issues I struggle with myself is that a right is a moral claim to something, right? It can
Yeah.
only be made by a moral entity. Only a moral entity can have rights. But morality is dependent on freedom of choice, right? Children aren't operating on the level of free will like adults are. So and most people would certainly grant that a 3-year-old doesn't have the same rights as a 25-year-old,
Mhm.
right? And I end up with some very difficult things. Well, if I say, well, if a fetus doesn't have any rights, well, then can I take a newborn baby and throw it across the room? Does it have rights? And
Correct.
I ultimately don't know where to draw that line. What
Yeah.
I do know, though, I do know that a mother has rights.
Mhm.
And I do know that Murray Rothbard makes a very strong argument
Yeah.
that no,
He was very much so pro-choice.
yes, because he made
I'm
the
I'm a
argument.
big Rothbard guy, but yeah.
Yeah, he said that nobody has the right to live as a parasite on another.
Yeah.
And I found that argument, even when I read it and was pro-life, I found it compelling because
Mhm.
it made sense to me. So for those reasons, I'm pro-choice. I'm not emphatically so. I don't think that anybody that's pro-life is a monster or a jerk. I think it's a
Mhm.
very complex subject that
Very.
I think intelligent people can disagree, because you're right. I mean, is it when the fetus is viable? Is it
Yeah.
when it can feel pain? Is it
Yeah.
when it can live on its own? And
Heartbeat, a million. There are a million different standards, and
yes,
when you have a million different like, just kind
it's
of,
difficult. It is. And I think that this is where I get into aggravating situations sometimes in discussions, because I don't know the answer. But just because I can't answer a particular very difficult concrete doesn't negate the ethics that I'm talking about, or
correct.
the
No,
ethics that I'm a
I
proponent
completely
of.
agree with that.
But some people seem to think you have to have an absolute answer for everything. I'm just not that smart. And I don't think anybody else is either.
Yeah.
One of my biggest problems with influencers of all, from all stripes is there's almost well, no, there is an incentive to always be out there with the next take. and they end up
This
presenting
is
far
very,
more
very,
certainty than what's warranted,
this is
right?
very,
Instead of
very,
saying, you know what, I think this is a possibility, they say this is the case. I mean, I critiqued a chain of reasoning by Clint Russell the other day, where he said, I'm 90% sure of this. And he went through this whole thing. He
yeah,
said,
I read that.
okay. And my thing was, it's not even that I know he's wrong in everything that he said. It was just that there's no way that you can be certain of all these unknowables and undecideds at this point in time, but he presents it that way. And most influencers do that when they talk, when they write, with everything they do. They present things as if it's very neat and very understood. And I just think that that's a mistake. I hate to say it's dishonest because I don't like to read the intentions of other people, because it's a very difficult thing to do. But I do know that those conclusions aren't warranted. Even if 5-10 years from now they all turn out to be correct, doesn't mean that today they're justified.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think I was talking to I think I was talking to a buddy of mine, like not maybe 4 or 5 months ago, about that exact topic. That like everyone has to be an expert in every single topic,
Right.
especially in the influencer class, those type of people. And
Right.
like, you know, if you jump around, first you're like an expert on tax policy, and then you're an expert on Ukraine, and then you're an expert on, you know, what exactly, you know, they should do in the schools in the 7th grade math class. Like, I'm not so sure that you actually know.
Yes.
It's impossible for you to know 100% about that thing, that thing, that thing,
Right.
and that thing.
It's just not possible. And what, like, one of the things I've come into with the Israel question, for instance, anybody can find a historian or a group of historians. Not, I shouldn't say anybody, but on either side of the equation can find historians that are going to back the narrative that they prefer. I could do it right now. And it doesn't mean there's not a right answer to the question, and not at all. And I tend to be more sympathetic toward Israel, especially in regard to Hamas. That doesn't mean I think that everything the Israeli government does is correct. I don't think everything any government does is correct. And I'm very
I don't
suspicious.
think much of any government.
Yeah. So you know what I mean?
Good at all. So yes.
Yeah, I do tend to think with in regard to that conflict that there's people that act as if Israel is the sole problem in the world and completely neglect the role, for instance, that Islam plays in the conflict.
Of course. Yes.
And I think that's a mistake as well. And I'm not an expert on that. I've interviewed some people on the subject. I've read a ton about the history of Israel, but I understand that there's different versions of the history. There's
so
different
much.
claims. Yeah. And it's not, to sort that out, you really have to go through a lot. One thing I'm certain of is I'm opposed to foreign aid to any government, whether it be Israel or anybody else. But that's independent of my thinking on that,
about
on the conflict.
What's going on at the moment.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
I'm kind of in the same area. I would say I've read some on it, but just, I'm young. This conflict, 1948 and before and before. And I've read some about it, and it's really the people that seem to make it out as one side or the other is completely in the wrong, and the other side couldn't have ever done anything else. It seems to me that those people are
right.
More so just trying to push a narrative. I think
my
narrative
claim from the get-go on this was this. On a relative scale, I held that Israel is morally superior to Hamas. That was my conclusion from the get-go. Or maybe it's my premise. It depends on the context. And I'd be happy to discuss that. Who's right and wrong in any given conflict? I'm well aware there's far more information. I have a version that I think is correct, but I'm by no means certain of it, so I stay away from it. But this kind of reminds me of how I came in contact with you to begin with. So I'm going to give you a chance to ask me some questions about this, as you've gotten on me about getting on Dave Smith, right?
Well,
No, I want to give you the chance. I want you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but no, I want you to ask the questions that you have. Even, I mean, you can ask me anything. I don't, if I'm wrong about something, then I'm wrong, and then I'll change my opinion. It's not.
Yeah, no, for sure.
A big deal.
It's not, it's because this is my main thing, is because I think like objectivists, libertarians, like ANCAPs, whatever you want to call them, kind of all, I think obviously not that we share the same values per se, but we kind of look at the world in 75% of the same way in a lot of ways, if that makes sense. So yeah. I think it would be productive if somehow, some way, kind of objectivists and libertarians were more known for being able to agree to disagree and kind of not focusing so much on each other's inaccurate, or I won't say inaccuracies, but kind of shortcomings and things like that, and kind of trying to be more of just the liberty-based people, but just because there aren't that many. So like Republicans are very, very, I mean, they'll tell you that they're for small government, but
they're not.
I've been alive for 25 years, and I think the debt's gone from $1 trillion to 35 trillion. And but go ahead.
Well, I was going to tell you. So for 25 years, I was in prison. For probably 20 of that, I identified as an objectivist and a libertarian. I always had the thought, why can't objectivists and libertarians just work together? That was always in my thinking. The economists that fueled my thinking were Mises, Hayek, Friedman, Henry Hazlitt, Frederick Bastiat, a lot of the same people that inspire
all the people that I've read as well. Like
yes.
Yeah. And that's how I got into kind of all of this. I guess because you kind of asked me that in the beginning, but the economics part was kind of how I got into that. But go ahead.
That was my initial thing too. So I got out of prison, and that was my goal, was to work on unifying liberty-minded people. I actually became the spokesperson for the Libertarian Party of Connecticut for about 4 months out of prison. And I was working on that fusion of having all these groups work together. And what ended up happening were a couple things. One, the Mises Caucus of Alabama made a post praising the Unabomber. And so when that happened, I went to the head of the Libertarian Party of Connecticut as the spokesman, and I said, listen, I want to say something about this. Like, I don't want to be associated with that. That is absurd. Now, around the same time, I started seeing these posts coming from the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire that I thought were just absolutely some gross things. Now circle to Dave Smith. A friend of mine told me while I was still incarcerated, he said, there's this guy, you got to listen to him. You're going to want to get in touch with him. His name is Dave Smith. He said, I think you're going to share a lot of political views with him. You can probably work on some prison reform stuff with him. So you've got to find him when you get out. Okay. So I got out and I followed him on Twitter. A few things happened. One, maybe a week after October 7th, he was already painting Israel as the wrong party in the dispute. He, if not explicitly, sure seemed to be drawing in a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Israel's not above critique. I don't think that anybody that criticizes Israel is an anti-Semite. I'm very loath to call people racist or anti-Semites. I don't like to do that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean those things don't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
It means I'm careful. So I don't throw stuff like that around. But I did think that Dave was wrong, and badly so, in his denunciations of Israel. I think the point can be made about not giving them foreign aid. about not saying that they're always right, and you can certainly criticize them, but acting as if you have the only semi-free society in the Middle East and comparing them to Hamas. Now, I'm not talking about your average Palestinian citizen. I'm talking specifically about Hamas. I thought was bad. But then he came out and he called Tucker Carlson an American hero. And I said, this is just ridiculous. Like, Tucker Carlson is not an American hero. I've seen Tucker Carlson. I used to like him a lot. I think he's a smart guy. I used to watch him back when he was a conservative with the bow tie, and he would go on Chris Matthews. I used to see him in prison. I thought he was a very reasonable guy. But what I've heard come out of his mouth, the changes I've seen, that sort of thing, I said, no. So he's not a hero. So I challenged Dave on that. Well, no, matter of fact, I didn't even challenge him. What I said was in a tweet, and look, tweets can get away from me as they can from anybody, right? I'm irritated, and I'll tweet something. And if
we've all sent a tweet,
right,
and
right, and there was a better way that I could have phrased this. I'll grant you that. And what I said was, Dave Smith says Tucker Carlson's an American hero. Dave is not somebody to be listened to. The way it was interpreted was like I was calling to cancel Dave and people should not listen to his show. What I meant was people should not be taking moral advice or listening to the moral claims of Dave Smith. That's not the way I put it. So that's how I ended up getting into my first sort of tussle with him. From there, what I did was said, I want to debate you on ethics. That's where I wanted the challenge to be. What ends up happening is people swarm, right? I've got 2,000, not even. I've got roughly 1,800 followers, right? He's got 300, 400, maybe 500,000 followers.
Yeah, I think he has
and they just came in and swarmed me. And, I'll get defensive as much as the next guy.
Yeah. When you're the guy under the dog pile, it's hard not to just hit people.
And the thing was, I'm trying to have a straight line discussion with Dave, right, about a topic, and people are bringing in all kinds of irrelevant stuff. I mean, being called a Jew, and of course that's your view. Look at your last name, and then well, you're a convicted felon. You're and all that sort of stuff. So now I'm trying to fight all that, and I can imagine I said things or tweeted out things that I would have rather not have tweeted. But the main issue I had is as somebody who's identified as a libertarian since I was 25 years old. Right. I'm 48 now. Somebody that came out of prison and wanted to make a difference in this movement, who believes a lot in it and very seriously. I honestly think that much of what Dave does is counterproductive to the movement. Right. That's why I want to debate him. Now, suppose I'm wrong. I don't think I am, but I know that you like him. So suppose I'm wrong. Okay, well, then hash me out and show me I'm wrong. So I challenged him to debate. He refused, and that's fine. And I never said he was scared. I never thought such a thing. I would never say such a thing. But what he would do was mock me on social media. So then I said to him, it's interesting that you say you don't have time to debate, but you have the time to mock me instead of engaging the discussion. So we got kind of into a hostile relationship, and I'm not innocent in that. It escalates on social media.
Takes two to tango, no doubt.
Right. But my ultimate issue with Dave Smith, just so you know, is one, I think he's bad for the movement. Two, I think he lacks an ethical standard. And I think if he was to debate me on ethics, I would win handily. And three, I think that would give me notoriety. Right. And I don't see anything wrong with any of those. And somebody comes out and says, oh, that's clout chasing. What do you think I'm on social media for?
Like, what do you think? Come on, man. Like these people, that's really funny because, I mean, okay, yeah.
When Dave goes out and tries to debate Ben Shapiro, is that clout chasing?
Yeah, like
you know what I mean? Yeah. I don't think so.
Yeah, of course it's not. Like everyone on social media is kind of trying to, they want to build like I mean, me personally, I'm not someone who would even like being famous. I don't think I would. I kind of like the Kind of like I'll make my money, I'll put it away, I'll live in like a decent sized house, like in the woods somewhere, I'll be all right. But everyone on social media that's, influencer, talking about politics, philosophy, things like that, like just kind of in the idea space, they all want to grow their platform. I mean,
Of course.
like
And there's nothing
it's
wrong with that.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. So yeah, I completely get where you're coming from. I mean, I think in regards to kind of some of the stuff you said on Dave, I think obviously smart guy. At least it seems to me, smart guy. I think he actually does read a lot. I think he does outsource some of his reading to some other guys, Scott Horton, who I think he's very intelligent. I've listened to him a lot. He's very good at backing up what he's trying to say, whether that be with quotes, whether that be with videotaping, whatever that may be. But I would disagree that Dave is bad for the movement because of the way, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, but he is able to come to me, kind of speak the ideas of liberty in a way that is very easily digestible to the public. I think that some of these things, and that kind of leads into another question that I kind of wanted to ask you, but some of these things, as far as like libertarianism, and then you get into like Austrian economics and like understanding human action and like understanding like subjective like value theory and like why that, like I'm buying that candy bar at the store that's $3 because that candy bar to me is worth more than the $3 that's in my pocket. Mm-hmm. So, and from Austrian economics to whether it being non-interventionist or understanding rights. Now that's something where maybe libertarians and objectivists would disagree, but some of these things are very complicated. And when you have someone that's pretty charismatic, pretty funny, and is able to somehow communicate those ideas, I don't know how they could possibly be bad for the movement, even if it's definitely possible that some of their theory is, I'll say, arguable.
So is your question to me, why do I think he's bad for the movement?
Yes. I kind of had, there's another question on top of that for kind of a little bit different direction, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll let you ask that one too. But first I want to point out something about the accusation of clout chasing. Everybody sees, right? Not everybody, but a lot of more people see when I challenge Dave Smith to a debate, right? And they say, oh, look, you're just challenging him because he has more followers. Yeah. They don't see where I reach out to you and say, hey, come on the show. If you want, you can ask me anything you want.
Yeah, of course.
Right. And I've done that before. I mean, I've had guys that I just meet. Okay, well, come on, we can debate. We can talk whatever you want. That's fine. Mm-hmm. The reason I think Dave's bad for the movement is because of the very things that you said. I think he is very charismatic. I think he is a powerful communicator. And I think that he fundamentally misunderstands rights. And I think he's very, very, very wrong on immigration. But I think both his immigration views and his rights views stem from a lack of understanding of ethics. And because of that, I think he does have the opportunity to convince a lot of people, to bring a lot of people along, but I don't think he's bringing them along to what I would regard as a free society.
Okay.
And not only that, but he caters, or I don't want to use the word caters, but he promotes people like Clint Russell, like Josie, the redheaded libertarian, like a Tucker Carlson or a Candace Owens. And I think that these people,
I don't call at the very least, I don't know, 60% of those people, I don't consider 60% of the people libertarian. So yeah.
So because of his lack of understanding of rights and his lack of understanding of ethics, his promotion of closed borders, or at least some version thereof, his promotion of these influencers, I think that if the libertarian movement or the freedom movement, the capitalist movement, whatever you want to call it, comes to in the public eye, to what extent it's seen in the public eye as represented by people like Clint Russell and Josie the redheaded libertarian, we're toast. because those people have a very large audience. But I can tell you that your average person sees that quote from Clint Russell where he says he's 90% certain that COVID was a bioweapon created in a lab with the intent purpose of testing our compliance and getting Trump out of office. And people are like, what the like, that's just batshit crazy.
No, there's definitely some. I think there's a few stretches there, just a few. And like, and I've even told you, I think you had sent me a tweet of maybe a tweet of his from a bit ago, and it was something where overstating is common because he seems to be a bit more of a, and not that I don't think that a lot of the quote unquote conspiracy theories of the past, 6 or 8 years have kind of come to be true, or things that they call conspiracy theories, right? But he's a bit of a, he likes to dive into things and try to, quote unquote, figure them out. Now, whether he's figuring them out correctly or not, like that, that's up to him and the truth, I guess. But overstating is a problem, and that I think it's pretty easy to grant that.
But for those reasons, I think Dave is bad for the movement. That doesn't mean I hate the guy, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is when you get involved in back and forth tweets, you can't read somebody's emotional expressions. You can't have moments of warmth between the two of you while it's just these cold tweets that are then amplified by a community of people, right?
Yeah, and then the factor of kind of wanting to be the one who catches the alley oop and dunks on someone and just says the most catchy thing, and it really shouldn't be that way. But, social media kind of makes it that way where you're going back and forth and then someone says something kind of slick and takes a little dig. And then you're like, oh, I have to kind of one up that. And then the next thing you know, you're kind of.
And understand, I don't know if I can help you personally or anybody else to appreciate this, but given my past of being extremely violent and spending a lot of time in prison, I have to be very careful in what I say, because something that somebody else says that's taken lightly, if it comes out of my mouth or is on my tweet, comes off completely differently. So when I've got people attacking me, calling me names and all kinds, I can break balls with the best of them. Going back to when I'm a kid, I can get into the food fight and have a lot of fun doing it. But I also know that I'm trying to cultivate something here. I'm trying to grow something, and I don't want to get caught in that. And that makes it even more difficult. Okay, so you said you had another. I'll let you ask that, and then I got to wrap up. But I am curious to know what the other question was.
Yeah. So, do you think that the average person can understand libertarianism and/or objectivism?
It depends what you mean by average person, and it depends what you mean by understand. Do I think that your average guy is going to slough through Human Action, Man, Economy, and State, then top it off with George Reisman's Capitalism? No, I don't. I don't think they're studying John Maynard Keynes or anything like that. I do think, or, are they going to read, Peikoff's, Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, the average guy? Probably not. I do think that the average person is capable of understanding that I should be able to act in my own interest, in the interest of my family, that the government should not be taking such extensive amounts of money from me, that we should not be funding governments all over the world, that, if you raise the minimum wage, you're going to cause unemployment. I think people are capable of understanding things like that.
I don't know if people are capable of understanding that last thing you said. Truly.
But that's it. Well,
first three, I think you're right.
Yeah, and you might be right there, but I'm just saying that I don't think you're going to get the average person that's going to just devour. I mean, I had 25 years in prison to read, to study, to journal these things and challenge myself and everything else. People don't have the time to do that. Yeah. But I do think that people can understand basics, and I'm a cynic in some sense, and I'm optimistic in the other sense, because things have turned on real quickly. Like if you look at 20 years ago, no one was really thinking gay marriage was going to be legal. Now it's accepted, and there's not a real problem with it. Marijuana, after decades and decades of them arguing for its legalization, now it's legal.
Mhm.
So things can happen. They don't always happen at the pace that I want them to, but they can. Change can come about. It can happen. I mean, look, Donald Trump was elected, for God's sake, twice.
Yeah. No one would have ever.
No, people thought it was absurd, including myself, the first time around, that he would get elected, and he did. Now, I happen to think that's a bad thing. I think it was bad for Kamala too, but whatever. But nonetheless, it can happen.
Is a good one.
No, but you can. I think that people can understand the basics of liberty, and I think most people certainly understand that they want to be free from physical force from others.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think at the very least, I do think people can understand the basics. But sometimes I'm telling you, my faith in humanity, like and kind of the reason I asked was I was reading, I just kind of randomly came across it. I was reading a study on IQ, and it was talking about, it was kind of looking at the different IQ ranges. And I believe it was like a standard deviation below the mean is not there. Those people are not able to understand like second order effects, that like one action has multiple different, like it's not just having the effect that you like the 1-to-1, it's having a plethora of different effects around it. And so I kind of started thinking about that. I'm like, okay, like one standard deviation below the mean. So like that means, let's say, minimum 25% of the population can't even understand that. So then, therefore, are they even able to understand? Like, are they able to understand, I guess, from my standpoint, like non-aggression, or like, I mean, you may just disagree with this, but like self-ownership, or kind of even understanding why libertarianism is right, like why growing the government is wrong. If that makes sense.
Well, if the question is, do I think most people are going to come to understand argumentation ethics, then no, I don't. And I happen to think argumentation ethics are wrong for a lot of reasons, but no, that type of thing I don't. And nor do I think it's really necessary in order to move toward a more libertarian society. I think it can be done. It's slow. It's a process. And I was reprimanded recently by somebody in my DMs, and correctly so. And he told me, you can't take the attitude that if people were just more reasonable, they'd agree with me. He said that's a recipe for disaster, right? You just can't, like, that's, and I find myself getting caught in that. And I'm by no means the only one, but of
course
I'm concerned with me. And first of all, it's a pompous attitude to take. And secondly, it's just not a good
I have
way
a girlfriend, so I completely understand
that. yeah. It's not a good way to start a conversation. It's not a good way to have a conversation. It's probably not accurate either. You know what I mean? So I think it's best if we take the approach that, look, you came on my show, you and I disagree. We still have a nice discussion, right? People hear this. Who knows what they take away? Who knows who that person then goes to and passes it on to? You never know how things spread and how they transpire and how they grow. And all we can do is make our points. And what else?
That's right. That's right, man.
So, David, where can people find you? I mean, I know they can find you on Twitter.
I mean, man, I'm really just on Twitter. I mean, I'm.
All right, well, give them your name. What's your name on Twitter?
It's Dpharr 1 on Twitter, and that's pretty much the only place I am. I've considered talking into a mic before, but I don't know if I'll ever really make it there. But
well, hopefully you'll come back on this show and you can do some more talking.
I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Thanks a lot. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. Till next time.